Welcome, Meadow.
Hi, Alex.
This is so great to have you. I'm thrilled that you can join us, and I know that the rest of the audience here is so excited to dip into something that is well outside our comfort zone, but sure to be awesome, and I'm sure that we have some gems ahead of us. So without further ado, take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alex. I'm so excited to be here tonight and to sort of teach you all a little bit about my world. I am a bubble magician, and you might not know what that is, but I work a lot with bubbles. A lot of magicians, they start with cards. I didn't. I started with bubbles. So a little background about me. I come from the musical theater world. I studied musical theater. And along the way, I ended up in children's entertainment as a princess performer. So I decided I wanted something that was a little more me and less a trademarked character. But I really love children's entertainment, and I still wanted to do that. So I turned to magic, and I still wanted to have a character that appealed to children, and I didn't want to be a clown. So I chose a fairy because that appeals to children. And with that character, I started a message of kindness, and I started doing bubbles, bubble magic, and like plant magic and elemental stuff. So I started doing that show, and it was with Meadowlark the fairy. And she was this character that I completely fleshed out like you would a D&D campaign. And I know there's a lot of you out there that play D&D. So yeah, and then a few friends of mine pointed out how well she would probably fit into the Renaissance Fair world. So then I took her to the Renaissance Fair, and I started doing my show there. And it became a huge hit. And the biggest hit of my show was the bubble stuff. So I decided to take that bubble stuff and see where else I could go with it. And here I am. But so I sort of dropped that fairy persona and decided to be more me and show kind of my aesthetic and what I'm about. So certainly, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat today. We're going to have a Q&A at the end, and we'll chat about all the bubble stuff that you have questions about. If there's anyone out there, if you have performed with bubbles before, please put a 1 in the chat. I'm curious to see how many of you out there might have already had experience with bubbles. I know there's a few bubble enthusiasts that we're going to tune in tonight. So if you're out there, put a 1 in the chat. So I wanted to go into the history of bubbles first. There's always been a fascination with bubbles throughout history. Oh, there's a lot of you out there putting 1s. That's great. That's fantastic. So bubbles have been a part of the arts, mathematics, science, physics, even religion. Even Leonardo da Vinci himself had a fascination with bubbles. If you see some of his drawings and his sketches, he studied fluid mechanics and drew little bubbles and the swirls, and it's really interesting to see that. But then it moved on over to his artwork and the fascination that he had with orbs and how light diffusion played on them. And you can see that in some of his art, like Salvator Mundi, where it's a figure of Christ in a very mundane form, holding an orb, and it's got 3 little specks for the Trinity. But it's really interesting to see how bubbles have played throughout all different topics. So bubbles and magic is also not new. Bubbles and performance is not new. Bubbles have been on the vaudeville stage, and they've had a role in magic for a very long time. There's been magicians like the great Henson, Doug Henning, Vito Lupo, Finn John. I could go on. Losander. There's so many magicians that have put bubbles in their acts. Certainly, that is not the only magicians. There is a huge list of them, and I could go on and on. But magicians have been able to take bubbles and do really interesting things with them. One of my favorite things that a lot of magicians do is with smoke bubbles and doing productions from them. It's a great visual. You can do a really beautiful silk production, you name it, a rose production, a dove production, a ball production, whatever it is you want to produce. That creates a nice little cover for you as a burst, and it's really beautiful. So certainly bubbles do have a place in your magic show. So there are a lot of bubble enthusiasts out there that just work with bubbles and not really on the magic side. Bubble artists. I am a member of the Association of Bubble Artists, the AOIBA.org. You can find them there. There's about 81 of us worldwide, and it is spearheaded by Tom Noddy, who is the bubble guy, who he sort of was the one who brought bubble artistry to the performance world in the 80s. You might have seen him on television, and you may know of him. And his list is long for his television appearances. He's been on TV a bunch of times, so I won't go into that, but he's a really interesting guy, and you should check him out. He is still performing. He performs at lots of museums across the world, and he even has brought his bubble magic to the online platform. He's doing some virtual shows, and you should definitely check him out. He's very charming, and he's a very interesting person to talk to, and I really adore him. And you can just tell that the enthusiasm for bubbles, which I totally get, comes through him, and he's so happy to share it. So the science of bubbles. We should probably get into that because bubbles are very scientific. If you see my house right now, I have, so much bubble paraphernalia that it looks like a drug lab in here. There's like powders and scales and liquids and all kinds of crazy things to mix different bubble solutions. But sort of the science of bubbles, if you think of the surface of a bubble and you see the swirls on the surface of the bubble, it's very reminiscent of other worlds. It's reminiscent of Jupiter. If you look at the surface of Jupiter or the atmosphere of Jupiter, you see all the swirls and the eye of the storm. That's turbulent force. And that's kind of what's happening in that little rim of the bubble. Now, if we had colors in our air, you would see that we have turbulent force around us all the time. And you can see that when you snuff out a candle and you see the smoke rise and swirl all around you. Or if you use the infrared camera, you could see that. So bubbles barely exist. They are nanometers thin. They're about 10 to 1,000 nanometers thin. And a piece of hair, just by comparison, is about 40,000 to 60,000 nanometers thin. So very, very, very teeny tiny. They barely exist. And that's because really it's almost down to a molecular level. Like they're like a sandwich, really. If you take 2 soap molecules and you put a water molecule, sandwich it right in the middle. That's kind of what makes up a bubble. And of course, it's air that's trapped inside. So what makes bubbles pop? That's a really important thing to understand when we talk about bubbles. So dry surfaces make bubbles pop. Forces make bubbles pop. If the wind is blowing too hard, that's going to make the bubble pop. If you're handling bubbles and you're a little too rough with them, that's going to make them pop. What else? Let's see. Oh, debris in the air. Certainly, I have gone to places where it has just been a very dusty stage, and it is no bueno for making bubbles. That is no good. So humidifiers will help if you come across dry conditions. Um, Also, you want to look out for things. Um, if you're working outdoors, you want to make sure you're not near a smoke source. So if you're, say you're working a festival, you want to make sure you're away from food trucks, and barbecues, any of those type of things. Little bugs that fly in the air, they are a source of frustration. Um, so they will pop your bubbles because they're tiny, but so are bubbles. So they're going to break that surface tension and pop your bubbles. So you want to make sure you stay away from bugs, but then also you want to be very careful with pesticides and things that are in the air where you're working. And likewise, if you're inside, you want to look out for aerosols. You don't want to be close to the dressing room, because if there's a lot of hairspray flying around in the air, that's going to affect your bubbles, and that's no good. So you also want to make sure that you don't get a lot of debris in your bubble solution. As you're working, you might get grass in there if you're outside. If you're inside, you want to make sure you don't get hair in your bubbles. That's always going to affect what you're doing, and make it a lot less effective. So why bubbles? Why do you want to bring bubbles to your show? Um, you know, they, as Tom Noddy says, bubbles are no illusion. They're real magic. They are bright and colorful all on their own, and they're really beautiful. So people from all ages can enjoy them from age 1 to 101. They're also, you're able to appreciate them silently. You can create an entire show that's silent, that's mimed, or it's to music and choreographed, and it's very beautiful. So your show can be multilingual. It's also versatile in that you can adapt a bubble show to pretty much any theme, using your costuming or your music or whatever. You can have a Renaissance fair theme, or you can go with a galaxy girl or boy theme. And then when you start introducing lighting and black light, it gets even more interesting, and it's so versatile in what you can do. You can also adapt it to different types of audiences. You can have a children's show, or you can have a more adult show that's for like a cabaret, or even a burlesque show. There are definitely some burlesque bubblers out there. If that's what you want to do, you totally can take it that direction. So it's very versatile in whatever you want to do. And then you can also combine it with magic, which makes it even more interesting. So I wanted to show you a little bit of a demo, some of the most basic things that you can do with bubbles using just your hands. You don't even need any tools. You just need a bubble solution and your hands. And it's one of my favorite things because we think of bubbles as a very, do I even have one around here? I don't. We think of them as just coming from a little bubble wand, from a little bottle. That's the classic image of bubbles, and we don't really think about how they're created or where they come from. But bubbles can be created from any film from a closed shape. So when I do hand bubbles, first of all, you always want to make sure that your hands are clean, because if you have oils on your hands, that's going to affect your bubbles and break down your solution over time. So you want to make sure that you start with clean hands. And you want to make sure you have a towel, obviously. Always have a towel nearby. And a note to magicians, you always want to make sure that if you are doing other effects in your show and you're combining bubbles and using your hands, you want to make sure that you're either washing your hands in between effects and drying them, or that you've practiced your sleights in conjunction with doing bubbles prior. Because doing bubbles with your hands, you will have a little bit of a film on your hands, and it can make some of those sleights a little more tricky, especially like card slides. So you want to make sure that you've practiced that and you've made sure in sequence with your other effects that it's not going to mess things up. But one of my favorite things is to just do a little hand bubble. And I'm dropping things. So I got my towel here because I don't want to get myself all soapy. So when you create a bubble, you're going to make an okay symbol like this. You can do your hand like this, but it just isn't very aesthetically pleasing. So just like if you've ever taken a ballet class, you want to make your hands look nice, right? So an okay symbol with your 3 fingers up looks really nice. Now you're going to take your thumb and you're going to have it against your index finger and slide it out like this to create that bubble film. I don't know if you can see it. There's a bubble film in there. Yeah. So, but you want to make sure that your hand is completely covered in bubble soap. And fair warning, it will start to drip down your arm. Your sleeves are going to get wet. That's just the nature of being a bubble artist. You have to get used to it. So then you can just blow a bubble right through as if this was a bubble wand. And if your hand is still wet, you can catch a bubble. And you may have to redunk your hand because it will start to drip off, and you will have less solution on your hands. So especially this outer rim right here, it will start to dry out. So when you're doing the bubbles, you see how it catches on this side over here. If the other side of your hand is dry and it touches that, it's going to pop. So you want to be very conscious of that. But then you can vary your breath and how you breath, and that will create more bubbles coming out. Or if you do a slower breath, you can create a big bubble. So there's a big bubble, and we've closed it. And see, it started to climb up my arm and it popped. That's what, if bubbles have a path to go, they'll start going there. But so if you vary your breath, and I'll show you, we can make a lot of smaller bubbles. We have to get some more. So you see how you can create a lot all at once. All right. So then if you incorporate both of your hands, you can do some more cool things. Okay. We're nice and gooey. So this time I'm going to blow a bubble, but I have this hand down here and it has bubble soap all over it, and I'm going to blow a bubble right into my hand. And then, oops, try again. And then, so what I was trying to show you was that I blew the bubble through and then I closed it. So that's important because you want to close the hole. And we closed it. So it's hanging on my hand, but it's also supported by this hand down here. And then you can do really cool things like make it dance. And then you can also, if you bring your hand down and around, then you can have the bubble supported by both hands on the bottom. I'm gonna bring it down. And then this is a fun thing to do with children's shows, especially really, really little ones, is to challenge them to see how many times we can count as it bounces. I'm curious to see how many out there do children's shows. If you do children's shows, put a 2 in the chat. If you do a children's show, put a 2 in the chat. So then you can bounce it and see how many times you can get a bounce on that. Now, you might have better success when you have a smaller bubble because there's less forces on it. All right. And then, so, oh, wow, we have a lot of people who do children's shows. So you can see how bubbles will really help to elevate your show because kids really love to chase and pop bubbles. So if you show them the magic with the bubbles and then promise them that you're going to make a lot of bubbles later for them to chase and pop, kids love that. They go crazy, and parents love it too because you're giving them a little physical activity and you're entertaining them for a while. All right. So another great thing you can do with hand bubbles is what I call bubble bumper cars. So this is with 2 bubbles, and you're gonna bounce one bubble off of the other. So, oh, and sometimes they combine, but if they combine, what you can do is tear them apart. I'll show you what that looks like. That was a stale bubble. So just like when you have, when you're coming up to a stoplight and you know that it's a stale green light and you know it's about to turn red, bubbles have a similar thing because all that liquid is draining to the bottom and the top of it is getting weaker and weaker over time as that drains because of gravity. So over time, if it's not popped by another force, just gravity and time will make it pop. So if they combine like that, you can just tear them apart like that. And that's just, you want to arch your fingers so you really have as many points around the sphere as possible. And then you can bounce it. Now there's a lot of surface tension at play here. But when you play with the forces, you can combine them. So that's some of the fun things that you can do with bubbles. Now, one more thing. That you can do as part of a making bubbles with your hands routine is blowing bubbles inside of a bubble. So just like you have a bubble film on a bubble wand and you're blowing through it, a bubble is a wall of bubble film in a sphere the whole way around. So you can blow bubbles inside of it. Now this takes a little bit of practice with varying the speed and force of your breath. But if you do short, quick breaths into the bubble, you can put bubbles inside the bubble. Like that. And you can do more than one at a time too. So that's some easy ways with no tools, just bubble solution that you can do in your show. And now I'm going to dry my hands. So let's talk about bubble solutions, because everybody's first question to me is, what do you use? What do you put in your bubbles? Yeah, see? Yes, absolutely. So a lot of bubble artists and bubble magicians are very secretive with their recipes, just like the secret sauce. And there's a reason. That's because a lot of us have done a lot of research. So whenever people ask me, I usually tell them lots of fairy tears because it's true. Being a fairy and trying to work through my solutions and experiments, there's been some times of frustration where I wanted to quit. But I kept with it and, have figured it out. So there's different solutions depending on what I'm doing. So if you see the really giant bubbles at festivals and outside, those are heavier bubbles, and they have to be more what we call self-healing, because bubbles are always trying to get to a sphere shape because that's a geometric perfection. They want the least amount of surface area as possible. So when you get it on a giant scale, it's kind of a big glob and it's trying to find its way. So there's a lot of force and, of course, the wind to contend with. So there's additives that you can use to put in your bubbles to make them more self-healing. There's lubricants, there's PEO, there's guar gum, glycerin. There's so many different things that you can add. Some people even use beer. Some people use sugar. Some people use corn syrup. There's a lot of things that you can add that make the bubbles a little more gooey and a little more stable. When I'm working with my outdoor bubbles, that's a gooier, heavier solution. Now, when I'm working on indoor bubbles, that is a lighter solution. And that means, remember how I told you that it's always draining towards the bottom? If there's less things to drag it down, it'll hang around for a little while for you to be able to make those little sculptures. Now, so there's a lot of bubble magicians and bubble artists who have different recipes, and every bubble artist's recipe is going to be different depending on what they're performing, what their preferences are, and also what their environment is. So just like I have a different stage solution versus my outdoor solution, and then even that varies from time to time. If I'm in a very dry, dusty stage, I'm going to add some more glycerin. If I'm in an outdoor space, I have a concentrate that I make. I might, add another half a cup of my concentrate to make it a little more gooey. If it's a really dry, hot day, you will become an expert in the weather and paying attention to the weather and the humidity. There is a reason why if I'm performing outdoors and I'm incessantly checking the weather and it's over 60% humidity and there's no wind, that's a sexy, sexy forecast. So you will pay close attention to the humidity and all that. So if you are looking to get started in researching bubble juice and things, a quick way to get started, I know this is going to sound, but hear me out. This is Fubbles. You can buy this online, and I'm sure other solutions will work, but there are a lot of solutions that will work for your basics. Let me just pour some of this so I can show you. Now, the only thing with store-bought bubbles is the potency. I'm just going to let this drain out. The potency, once you open it, it does tend to start to deteriorate. So if you want to reuse it, it may not be as great the next time you go to use it as it was when you broke the seal. Get all that out. Now, because of that, I recommend getting the 32 ounce. Unless you're going to use a lot, then you can get the 64 ounce bottle. But if you don't want to waste as much, then that might be the way to go. But so that will get you to be able to make some bubble sculptures using store-bought bubbles. And I'm going to use a straw. There you are. So there really is not that much of a secret. But so things like to grow in bubbles also. So that is one thing, and one reason why a lot of bubble artists make their own. It's cost effective, and they can make it right then and there and it's not going to start to deteriorate. So I do have a recipe for you at home if you would like to try to mix your own. So you'll want to get a piece of paper and pen handy to write this down, or I will have lecture notes available at the end of this, and you can get those, and it'll be included in there. So one of the other reasons why recipes are so difficult to work with is that sometimes those ingredients are very hard to find. There's some ingredients that you can only find in other countries, and there's some ingredients that are you have to go to like a special scientific website to find, and all of that. So hold on one second. I'll be right with you, buddy. Okay. I'm doing a lecture. Sorry, I have tiny humans, and they were asleep. So, anyways, so where was I? Yes. So some of the ingredients are hard to find, and also some of the instructions for making them get pretty complicated and difficult. So sometimes you might want to just go with the store-bought. And also, if you're doing a performance, one of the great things about bubble art is that it really does pack small and play big, because you can fly out across the country, and then you can go to a few stores to find some ingredients. But that I don't recommend that, because if you have a preference for how your solution works and your tools, then you may not want to do that, and it might be very stressful. But so the solution that I have for you today, if you're ready to write it down, you're going to use 1 liter of hot water, and it can be straight from your tap. Unless you know that you have really hard water, then you may want to get distilled water. But as a note, you want to make sure that it's not boiling. You want to make sure that it's just hot enough. And then you're going to use 150 milliliters of Dawn dish soap. Now there's different ones. I prefer Dawn Ultra because it's slightly more concentrated. But you can also play around with different ones and see which one you prefer. Some are more concentrated than others. And then you want 50 milliliters of vegetable glycerin, and you can find that online. And then a 1/2 gram of guar gum. So that's a powder. So you are going to need a gram scale. And because it's only 1/2 gram, those food scales for your kitchen are not going to work. You have to get one of those scientific scales. So the instructions for doing this recipe: first, you want to take the guar gum powder and the glycerin, and you want to put it in a bottle with a secure lid. And you're going to shake it really well with a little bit of that water. You're going to put probably 1/2 of the liter, so 500 milliliters of water in there, and you're going to shake it up. And then you want to pour it into another bucket. Let's see. And then I'm trying to see where my instructions are, so I make sure I tell you guys right. And then you're going to add the Dawn dish soap to the bucket, the 150 milliliters of Dawn dish soap, but you're going to add it slowly, and you're going to mix it as you do. But you want to make sure you're not making foam on top of your bubble solution. So you want to mix it kind of fast, but kind of towards the top. And you can use your hand if you like. I prefer, when I mix mine, I don't make it super, super duper hot. So I just use my hands, make sure they're clean, and I just use hands. Or you can use a spoon or a fork or a whisk, whatever you prefer, you can use to get a nice mix. And then you want to put in the remainder of the hot water, and you're going to leave it in an open bucket overnight. You can get away with 8 hours ahead of a performance. 24 hours is better. The more time it has to be open and to eviscerate or whatever it does, bruise overnight is better. And then after it's brewed, you want to put it in a container that's airtight, so nothing gets in there. And then you want to avoid storing it in direct sunlight because that's going to break it down. So you want to keep it in a dark place. And you also want to keep it away from extreme temperatures. You don't want it to get too cold, and you don't want it to get too hot. So you have to treat your bubbles like your baby. So you don't want to leave it in the car. And you're going to have to take it inside with you if you're having an overnight stay at a hotel. I have definitely drug buckets of bubbles into the hotel before, and they look at me like, what is she doing? And I'm like, it's just bubbles. You know, so you want to make sure that they stay at room temperature. Okay, so that's the bubble solution. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about safety with bubbles. You want to make sure that wherever you go, if you're performing, you want to make sure that your floor is protected and covered. We don't want anyone to slip or fall. That gives a bad name to bubble artists everywhere. And then there's going to be less work for the rest of us because they had a bad time that one time with the bubble girl making a huge mess and someone slipping and falling. The bride slipped and she broke her knee. We don't want that to happen. So make sure you cover your space. And it's always a good idea to have extra towels and a dry mop on hand just in case you have spills. And on that note, make sure you always have extra bubbles because there will be a time when it will happen. A child or an adult, clumsy adult, might knock your bubbles over. Not saying this has happened, but you want to make sure that you have backup just in case your entire solution goes or it gets compromised. You want to make sure you have backup. Also, the maintenance of your bubble props. You will have to wash your bubble props from time to time. And it sounds silly because they have soap and buildup on them, but you know, that's you have to make sure it gets washed off. And if you're finding that residue won't quite come off, you can use isopropyl alcohol to get that off. And then also, if you're using your hands often, you want to make sure you're taking care of your hands. You want to wash your hands afterwards. And as we all know, wash our hands a lot, your hands start to dry out from all the soap. So I recommend using Gold Bond Ultra to keep your hands nice. But you don't want to put lotion on ahead of a gig, ahead of a performance, because that'll be greasy and oily and it's going to affect your bubbles. Okay, so before we run out of time, because I do want to give you guys a chance for a Q&A, I'm going to show you how to make your own smoke tube and how to make a cube bubble. So real quick, and I do have lecture notes that goes into all of this and gives you the links to everything on where you can find it. So you're going to want a tube like this. You can find them on Amazon. It's an acrylic tube. This one is about 10 inches. I think you can get them in 12 inches, and you can cut them down using a PVC pipe cutter. Very handy to have. You're going to want some gaff tape. You always want gaff tape. And sometimes I like to wrap them in, what's it called? Athletic tape, the kinesiology tape, just because it mimics like a fabric a little more, and I like how it grips. So you may want to get that. That's optional. But then you're going to take also a straw, and you're going to have an e-cigarette. Now, this is a nicotine-free e-cigarette from MIG Vapor, M-I-G Vapor, and I have the links to that if you need it. But you're going to take a straw and cut it down to the same size as that. So a lot of bubble artists like to just have a straw with it next to it and wrapped. You can certainly do that, but then it's very obvious that you're using an e-cigarette, and I just don't like how it looks. So I prefer to do it like this. And the straw acts as a spacer in there. So I'll show you what that looks like. So you wrap the tape and you stick it inside there. And then it's a little less obvious that it's an e-cigarette. So you can find these, they're rechargeable. And I got a vanilla bean scented one, so it smells nice, no nicotine. Unfortunately, with this method, you are still taking it into your lungs and then exhaling. That is the downfall. But there are lots of smoke generators out there on the market that you can purchase. There's a lot of magic places have them, and even there's like the flavor blaster that you can get for blasting flavor into your drinks. But so just real quick, you're just gonna wrap it, and you want to make sure that the e-cigarette sticks out a little more, because when you do inhale it, you're gonna want to get a good seal on it to do a good intake of it. That sounds so but so you're gonna wrap it, and you might need more or less to get it to stick in there firmly. I would need some more on this, but I can do that real quick. See, I was smart and I pre-cut this tape because I'm a lady and I tear it with my teeth. I didn't want to subject you all to that. So yeah, so it sticks in there just like that. So I don't know if you can see. And then of course, if you have it wrapped like this, it sort of conceals it. You can use the disposable versions of the e-cigarettes. That's fine. Some people turn them backwards. But I have found that deteriorates like the electronics that are in it, and it will just die on you. And then when you want to replace it, you can just take tweezers or pliers and pull that out, charge it, replace it, whatever you need to do. Wrap it again, stick it back in. So real quick, you can make a cube-shaped bubble. So bubbles are a sphere shape, but if you push on their sides, you can change their shape. So if we push on 6 sides, you can create a cube. So a very important thing with your smoke tube, when you are using these, you want to make sure that you have a very deep cup or basin that you can get the length of the tube soapy. And then you want some sort of wand. You don't have to go this big. This is just my preferred tool for doing this, but you're going to start with 2 bubbles, one up top and one on bottom. Okay, and you're going to try and make all these bubbles sort of the same size. We're going to do 4 bubbles around the waist of this bubble. And don't be afraid to dip it back in. Now that one decided to jump down. So sometimes you can take the tube and try and drag it back up to connect at the vertices up top. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Bubbles are like children and animals. Sometimes they're finicky, so that's okay. We're just gonna redo that. They also have sort of a time limit. So if you don't work that fast, they will tend to pop on you. 1, 2, there we go. Oh, and it popped down to the bottom. There it goes. So you can sort of see in the middle, I don't know if you can tell, there is a square shape in the middle. So we're going to dip our smoke tube again to make sure it's nice and soapy, because we're going to stick this in on one of the vertices because that is a stronger point. where there's 3 bubbles all coming together. Oh, see, it popped. So you'll go in on one of the vertices, you'll intake some of that smoke, and you'll exhale it right into that square shape. So I'm going to show you one more time. Oh, and it popped out, but it was there for a second. But you get the idea. And then it will create a smoke bubble that is a square shape right in the middle. But I do want to leave it open for questions for the last few minutes here. But if you want to see more about, if you want to see me doing smoke bubbles and square bubbles and carousels and bubble walls and things, you can check out some of my stuff at meadowperry.com. And I do have a show coming up this Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So you can find tickets at meadowperry.com/events. And of course, if you follow my page and subscribe to my emails, you'll get to see all the fun, exciting things coming up with Bubble U. And all the things coming up with my show and my bubble adventures. So I wanted to see what sort of questions are out there. Alex, I don't know if you have the questions ready for me. I'm going to
I am here. So first off, that was awesome. And I had so much fun. I'm sure that everybody else did as well. Guys, if you enjoyed that, let us know in the comments. I was loving that. The hand, the smoke, this was super cool. I was feeling like a kid watching a great bubble show. And I gotta say, Meadow, that's what drew me to you in the first place. It's why I reached out, because I saw some footage of what you've been doing with your bubble magic show, and it was just awesome. It was engaging. It was really cool, and it's stuff that I'd never seen before, and I like that. So I'm thrilled that you've had some time to spend with us here. There's some really great questions. And one is from Josh. He's asking if there's a material that's best for clothing choices as a bubble artist.
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of bubble artists who will bounce bubbles off their clothes, and that's really fun. So wool actually works really well for this, and there's some spandex materials that work well. Well, not spandex per se, but like the microfiber, like the gloves. You've seen those kits at like Five Below, where you can bounce a bubble off a glove. So there's certain fabrics that you can wear, and you can bounce the bubbles off of you or off of a hat. It's kind of endless. Personally, I like to wear sleeveless tops because I put bubbles all over my arm, and then I drag a bubble up my arm. That's one of my favorite things to do. That's surprising to people. But that was a really good question. So yeah, there definitely is certain materials that are better than others, depending on what you want to do.
Right. And that's one of the cool things about the bubble content is it's so versatile, both by theme and, like you said, by audience, and certainly just by general context of what sort of tricks you want to show off. So Rob had a good question asking about your apparatus. He's never seen the bubble wall before. Do you come up with your own stuff, or where's this is super cool?
So the bubble wall is one of my favorite effects ever.
Yeah.
I did not create it. I did not come up with it. There is a bubble artist in Spain. His name is Pep Boo, and he is one of the top foremost bubble artists in the world. He has a very theatrical show, and it's beautiful. It's so gorgeous. So you should definitely check him out. But he is the inventor of the bubble wall and some of the effects that come from it. But certainly once you start working with bubbles and you kind of understand how they work and playing with their surface tension and what you can do with smoke, you do start to come up with ideas that you're like, I haven't seen anyone do this before. And then you can start incorporating different things. You just really play with it and go, oh, it can do this. And, it kind of builds itself sometimes.
So cool. Fred Rosenbaum had a great question. How much are the lecture notes? I understand you have a cool deal for IBM members.
Yes. So the lecture notes are going to be $10 for IBM members and $15 for non-IBM members. And you can reach out to me through email or through my website or even through Facebook. Get in touch with me, and we'll get that to you. So that was a great question.
That's awesome. It is indeed. Zachary Patrick here is wondering what Ren fairs do you perform at? Where should
Lots of them. So I call the New Jersey Renaissance Fair home, and then also the Sparta, New Jersey Renaissance Fair, the Midsummer Fantasy Fair up in Connecticut. I've also performed at the Connecticut Renaissance Fair. I've performed virtually for the Massachusetts Ren Fair, and they want to get me up there, when things come back in person. All the way out in Indiana and the Michiana Ren Fair. I've performed out that way. What else? Oh, and the Philadelphia Renaissance Fair. So I've kind of made my rounds on the East Coast a little bit. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, and here's one from Zachary asking about stage lighting. Any insights to the best stage lighting for Bubbles?
Yes. So with Bubbles and stage lighting, having diffuse lighting is very important. And if you saw my lights in here, you would see I have lights that bounce off the ceiling and off the side walls that are white, because that diffuse lighting kind of creates a halo effect around them. And then when you see them on the camera, it almost looks like a special effects. But then also when you're on a stage, obviously you can't have giant walls around you. So when you're on a stage, white light is the best, because the bubbles sort of scatter the lighting, unless you're trying to go for a very specific effect. If you you can do blues, and then it creates a blue halo. So it's really about the vision that you're trying to create and playing around with the lighting. That's actually one of my favorite topics, is playing with lighting. I love doing LED lights with bubbles, because it starts to reflect. And when you get lots of different colors, it looks awesome. It's one of my favorite things.
It really does. I have to say, seeing a good bubble artist and especially the reactions that you can gain in a show is just so captivating. And when you had mentioned working at fairs and certainly outdoor stuff, someone early on had mentioned, I wanted to pull up the comment, but it whizzed by us. Are most of your shows indoor versus outdoor?
So my indoor show and my outdoor show are two different monsters.
Right.
The outdoor show uses more magic than bubbles, because it's so weather dependent. I never know exactly what the weather's going to do. If it's going to be windy, obviously I can't do little bubble cubes and bubble carousels, because it's just going to blow away. So that's where I spend more time doing some hand bubbles and the really big bubbles, and then I do more traditional magic. Whereas if I'm indoors, I can control my environment. I can tell them to turn off their HVAC system, to not place me next to a door that's going to be opening and closing, so there's no wind that's gusting. So definitely two different shows when you're indoor and outdoors. But I prefer the indoor shows, because I can do so much more, and I can really control my performance space. So that was a great question.
And super well considered to have that versatility when you know that you're going to be in an area where maybe you have a little bit less control. Seize back that control by planning for that and making a little bit within yourself.
Absolutely.
Very smart. So here's one asking, where do you buy guar gum? It's not it's relatively available, I suppose, online.
It is relatively available. You can find it like anywhere. You can find it on Amazon, I believe, but it's a food additive, so it's used in lots of different applications. So you can find it in lots of places.
Right. Now, Eddie Morris is asking about learning about a little bit more about you and how you incorporate magic and bubbles and things. Now I know that you are one of the newest instructors on Bubble U. Yes. So I know that folks can go to nonsensekids.com to learn about some of that stuff. But anywhere else you want to point them?
Yeah, so I'm one of the new instructors with Carissa Hendricks at Bubble U. So if you're looking for more material on bubble magic and bubble artistry, you can go to nonsensekids.com and check that out. There's tutorials on full bubble shows. There's scripting on full bubble shows. There's discussion on there. So it's a great place to check out. You can go on there and see it's a subscription service. And yeah, so, but I will be having some lecture series coming up. And we're not exactly sure what that is going to look like in terms with Bubble U. So just follow my social media and subscribe to my email list, and you'll be in the know as soon as I know. And yeah, but as far as magic with bubbles, that will probably also be incorporated in future lectures. So stay tuned. Yeah, good things are happening.
So exciting. Well, thank you so much for being here with us. I had a great time. I hope you did too, Meadow.
Yeah, this was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Good. Well, thank you again, and sending all the best from us here at the IBM. Have an outstanding evening, and we'll take care and see you soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. Well, everybody, that was the first of Variety Talk. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Like I said, I was sitting here watching her make these hand bubbles going, oh, that's so cool, blowing through the wire. There's some really cool versatile stuff in there that I know you can add to your show, virtual or when socially distanced, safe, and in-person things return. We are off to the races with it. Having cut my chops in the fair industry, I can tell you firsthand the experience of seeing those kids fully captivated by bubbles that are wafting through the fairgrounds. They just go for them. It is really, really crazy and awesome cool to see. I see there's a few. There's one person who's asking for the imperial measurements for these. Just Google it. I'd say I think the only 3 countries in the world that use imperial still is the U.S., Myanmar, and Liberia. So maybe just change to metric, and then you'll just find it a lot easier to work with too. But Google works well. It works everywhere, so check that out. I hope you guys had fun tonight, and make sure to join us right back here again next week for the relaunch or restart of Schwaynanigans, the Magic Game Night. That is now moving to Tuesdays, not Monday. So you join us right here on Tuesdays for Schwaynanigans Magic Game Night with your Vice President, Mr. Billy Schway, and a whole lot of friends. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you right here, same time, same place next week for Schwaynanigans. Take care.